Hi, welcome to your favorite tech show on television where we look at issues, trends, developments in the global ICT industry. On this show, we also play host to tech CEOs, innovators, big thinkers, and the professionals to tell us their perspectives about the latest trend in the global tech ecosystem. Today promises to be very informative and educative as always. Stay with us.
Abi from Nigeria receives the first prize in the AISI techtvng category for his program ICT Africa. The Congratulations, Don Pedro.
ICT reporter of the year electronic, Don Pedro Agambe.
Today, digitization is life. So every sector you see running, no matter how slow or how fast it is running because of digitization.
One thing I think that we can do and should do is move our education from a theoretical perspective to a skill-based perspective.
In case you've just joined us, is your favorite tech show on television with Don Pedro Agambe. When we come back from this quick break, you'll meet a tech personality of the week. Of the week is the president of the Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria, ISPON, Mr. Chinenye Mba-Uzoukwu. Stay with us.
Chinenye Mba-Uzoukwu, a passionate advocate of software and innovation as the key to leadership and value creation in the competitive 21st century, with proven ability to lead teams to grow revenues and market share through innovation and people leadership. Chinenye was a former general manager for Microsoft Anglophone West Africa, with a goal to assist the software giant in its mission to achieve local relevance and growth through its partner ecosystem and its demonstrated commitment to the countries in which it operates in West Africa. He did not disappoint as he accelerated the company's growing presence in the country, involvement in corporate citizenship programs, partnership with public and private sector players in articulating and executing digital inclusive policies and projects, education, employment generation, and other capacity building initiatives. He was recently elected president of the Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria, ISPON.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
How would you assess the state of software development in Nigeria today?
Well, I would say if you look at it from a timeline, historical timeline, I would think that we are probably in the third interregnum, right? The third wave of software in Nigeria. And it's accelerating, and hopefully there will be a fourth wave within the next 5 years. I anticipate in the next 5 years there will be a fourth wave. But if you think about it, if we just map the growth of the ecosystem, the industry as a whole, to the timeline for the country itself, you would have the early days when there was little or nothing that was happening that we can speak about in terms of software in Nigeria, beyond some people having some skills. At some other discussion, I did a little bit of research, and I found that Professor Mobisin, who in Enugu was assembling computers at the same time that the Apple Mac was being launched in the US. And this was perhaps, one would say from a computing perspective, not from the mainframe era, but the movement into that PC era, that Nigeria in some ways was actually at the dawn of that enterprise, of this whole movement. And it's really interesting to see how the PC itself drove the emergence of a digital economy in the US over the next 20 years. And in Nigeria, we didn't see that acceleration. And I think there needs to be a lot of study to understand why. A professor, Mobisin, who was a professor in MIT, comes back to Nigeria, sets up a PC manufacturing plant or assembly plant in Enugu. And Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were doing almost exactly the same thing in the US. And one economy becomes the world's leader in technology, and the other goes a little bit stagnant over 20 years. Understanding the drivers of that, I think, is critical to what we're seeing now as what I would call the third wave of software in Nigeria, where that slow 20-year period where the country itself was coming to terms with the idea that technology is a fundamental driver of economic growth, that we would say perhaps got its acceleration towards the end of the 90s, and particularly over the Y2K issue, which brought technology into the public domain, the general public domain, and in some ways accelerated the industry. From 1980 to 1920, the year 2000, the millennium turnover, and then from the year 2000 through to the next wave, carried us all through to the next wave, which came up almost, I would say, nearly 10 to 15 years later. Because when you think about it, those who were building the industry, the technology industry, through the years 2000 to 10, were largely constrained by one element: connectivity. So the world, as defined, technology growth was driven by telecommunications as a pipe through which data and other services were carried. And on layers were built on top of these networks that provided services to people, and wealth was created. To the extent that that the technology infrastructure itself was limited, that's the extent to which the industry itself could actually grow. And so it's not a coincidence that by the year 2000, when we started to see the acceleration on the part of the telecommunications industry through the licensing of the GSM companies, and the proliferation from then to today, where we talk about 130-something million people being connected through mobile devices, that there is a parallel growth along in software in Nigeria. And so you start to see that as the industry, as the telecoms is moving out and is creating those networks, the connectedness, the connectivity, and the networks around that connectivity and the infrastructure that supports that, software now sits on top of that and starts to deliver services to the general public. And so you can see the massive expansion in telecommunications infrastructure, particularly from the submarine cable, from SAT-3 up until 2010, to the huge deployments that you see now from companies like Main One, from the SA cable, the WAX cable, the Glow One cable, all those cables, submarine cables that have brought so much connectivity to the coast, and are now being taken up country through fiber networks. So we've gone through yet another phase, which is that phase of growth from 2010 into now 2020. And so we are now ready for the next level of growth, which is what I expect to see over the next 5 to 10 years, provided we do the right things. And one of those things is to understand what went wrong in the years 1980 to 2000, and why there was this gradual growth from 2000 to 2010. There was a spurt and then a flattening. Then we can see a rapid hockey stick from 2010 going into 2020. And now from 2020 going to 2030 and 2040 and 2050, what do we expect to see? What I would like to see, and I think most of the industry would like to see, is an exponential. But for that to happen, the one thing that we must get correct, since we are working on the infrastructure side and we seem to understand what needs to be done there, we definitely have to figure out certain things around the software side. And it's an old story. It's an uncomfortable story for many, but it's the most fundamental thing. Countries that use technology grow technology. Right? So that growth can be growth that builds the domestic capability, or it can be growth that represents a net expropriation of capital and talent to other economies. So what do we need to do to ensure that as we continue to grow into that digital economy, we are not ultimately expropriating the efforts, the capital, the human resources to other economies, to grow other economies? And that is where the Software Nigeria story becomes absolutely critical. Because if we don't do the right things, then you would see all the largest systems that are being built that represent opportunities for growing the domestic technology industry, and local content will disappear. And it's not difficult to understand, because you look at the value chain. Okay? The phone that you're holding in your hand represents your connection to the digital economy. It goes with you everywhere. Where was it made? All the components, where were they fabricated? Then it has a little radio inside it. That radio connects you to a mast. There's a radio on that mast. Where was that radio made? The radio then connects you onwards to eventually connecting to a pipe that takes your communication outside. Everything in that value chain, into the pipe itself, to the connection point, internet connection points outside of the country, to the servers where you're consuming whatever you want, whether it is content that is coming from a YouTube, or you're going to a Facebook, or you're going to Google to go and do a search, or you're doing email on the Microsoft platform, or whatever. If all that service leads you outside of the country, then the cost that you put in, what you spend in terms of your time and your money, and the value that you create around your time and the money that you have spent, is a net outflow from the system to somebody else's economy.
Does it not worry you when experts say that software Nigeria is not as vibrant as it used to be?
I would argue that that's not really the case. I think that there's a transition that we're all going through, and that we need to recognize the wins as well as the losses. Where we have succeeded, we should speak to those issues, and where we haven't succeeded, we should ask ourselves. And just to use one example, look at the single treasury account and the emergence of Remita as a platform. System Specs is a company that is over 2 decades old, with extensive experience in the space in which it was operating around human resource management and all the issues concerning payroll and pensions and all those sort of things. They had decades of experience in that space. They had built out their own solutions. They had piloted solutions at the national stage. They were responsible for initial pilots around the IPIS platform. And as a result of that, and this is a big lesson that all of Nigeria, particularly policymakers, should leverage off of. There is no way that a company could have come from outer space and implemented an IPIS. It was the result of sustained investment of human resources over 25 years that produced Remita as a uniquely Nigerian solution to a global problem. And as a consequence of that, they were able to take that and go beyond Nigeria to other countries and be able to sell that Nigerian solution, Remita. It didn't exist anywhere. They didn't import it from anywhere. They built it on the basis of their own expertise over a period of time. And they came up with a solution that is currently managing a national platform for the country. If we were less focused on some of the other narratives. This is one of our biggest narratives. Another example is InterSwitch, that has transcended Nigeria, gone across Africa, and is a contender for a unicorn in this country. It's 100% a concept that came up in Nigeria, built by Nigerians, developed by Nigerians off of existing platforms. And they were able to create this ability for us to actually issue cards, electronic payments. They were not the first. There was eTransact in the 1980s online. The stories are there, the narratives are there, but we ignore those and we prefer to kind of like look at other stories that maybe are not necessary. And what we're saying is, if a country could have produced an InterSwitch, if a country could have produced a system specs and remitter, how many more are there? Today we talk about companies like Flutterwave. We talk about companies like Paystack. We look at the fintech space and we can see huge things happening inside the fintech space. But we haven't looked at the others. And I'm trying to say that opportunity for the growth of software in Nigeria exists to the extent that the players allow such organizations to step in and provide solutions. It would have been easy for people to perhaps have gone and bought some of these things. But if you look at what's happening, particularly in the fintech space, you realize that they are solving local challenges. And in the process of solving local challenges, they're creating software in Nigeria. It's the same story about InterSwitch. Once upon a time, we didn't have ATMs. Once upon a time, we didn't have cards. If you dial back, there were things like Diamond Bank Pay Card, donkey years ago. People have forgotten all those things. That we used to have wallets that you used to have to like plug your. Many people perhaps didn't understand all those things. When we built Online 2000, we thought it was never going. The year 2000 was never going to come. It was Nigeria's first PC banking software. Today, when I say PC, people don't know what a PC is. What is a PC? What's a personal computer? You say that to a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, you may not even understand what you mean by a PC. What do you mean by a PC? Because we come from a completely different era. But we built this software in 1994 and established remote banking services at the time when we were using analog telephone lines. And people were able to sit in their offices and transact with their banks via analog telephone lines. But the experimentation should not have stopped. It should have continued. The patronage should have continued, except we came to the year 2000. Most of the financial institutions were upgrading their core banking applications. And by then, those core banking applications also had modules around online banking. And they decimated the segment and moved the entire value proposition offshore. And for the next 10 years, there was little or no growth in terms of indigenous or local content in the space because we had been crowded out completely by foreign applications. At some point, 5 banking applications, all foreign, controlled all the banking systems in this country. All. So I'm saying it's not about trading blame or who's at fault. I'm saying that the opportunity is there, but we need to be intentional about how we approach it. And in some ways, we need to work in some kind of competition in the sense that we are in competition with each other, but we're also collaborating. I think the critical thing is to create the framework. And some of that is already in place, but we can see that it may not necessarily be working. For instance, we've got these executive orders, 3 and 5. To what extent, who has done a study to determine to what extent executive orders 3 and 5 have impacted the growth of the software in Nigeria? Since those executive orders were issued till date, billions of dollars worth of public procurement has happened in the software space that do not directly impact local content. So something is missing.
Where is the missing link?
I think we need to find out together. We have to work and try and find out together. I suspect that the missing link may be in the loopholes that exist for organizations to say that there is no Nigerian software. Well, there will never be. If you say that there is no Nigerian software to handle LNG shipping, if you say that there is no Nigerian software that can handle remote well-held operations in the oil and gas sector, if you say there's no Nigerian software that can handle billing for power systems, despite the fact that your law already says that 70% of technology in the deregulated PHCN, 70% of the technology must be Nigerian local content. And then you say there is no billing system that is Nigerian. There is no this, there is no that. When will there ever be? If there's no Nigerian system that can operate our railways, when will there ever be? If you say there's no Nigerian system that can operate, I mean, when you look at all these large systems, each time they say no, there's no Nigerian thing, and then they go and get somebody else to come and do it, they've effectively shut the door. And I can tell you that each time they shut this door, they shut it not for me, but for a generation. An entire generation is denied opportunity. You can't sign a contract that is 20 years. Commit yourself to software that came from China, or came from Germany, or came from the US. So what then is the young boy or girl who goes into university today supposed to do in Nigeria? If you have given away the platforms and you've signed it off for 20, 30 years, in the first instance, what then does that young person do? Create websites or do apps? This is the point. So we need to rethink what it is that we're doing. I think that the policy and the legislation to some extent may be in place, but we need to understand that every time we sign off on some of these things, we are literally writing away our future. At my stage and perhaps age, if you allow, there isn't that much that I'm looking for. And there are many people like us who are in that space. But we cannot, in good conscience, not be concerned about the next 20, 30 years and do things today that guarantee that there is space for them tomorrow. Because we're not going to rip out those systems that we have spent all this money for. Most of these contracts and most of these things are commitments that cover 20 years. Some of them are driven by debts, and we'll keep paying those debts. So there's no way that you would invest in such a thing and then rip it out 20 years from now and say a Nigerian should come in. There's no room there's no room whatsoever. If we put in place a census or civic registration system, and that system is a system that we got from Estonia, for example, we're not going to tear it out tomorrow and replace it to one that was made in Warri by some sharp young boys who understood and studied the system and figured out that they can actually build a system. Will you throw away what you've done to give those children opportunity? No. If they don't have the opportunity in Nigeria, are they going to go to Ghana to go and do census in Ghana? Or they will go to Rwanda to go and do census in Rwanda? Or they will go to Estonia to go and do census in Estonia? Once you close the doors on these systems by the kind of commitments that we are making today, then we are literally shutting the door of opportunity for the next generation that is compelled by the digital economy that they are born into. They're digital natives, they're born into it. So their entire life opportunity is tied into those systems. We cannot deprive them today what is supposed to be their opportunity by the year 2030, 2040, and 2050.
What is your concept of digital transformation vis-a-vis the digital economy and how it can help to leapfrog economic development?
The word transformation implies a process. When there is no process, then it's like an accident that has occurred to Nigeria. So there was never a time that we all planned to be doing webinars and seminars and meetings. We talked about it, but it was not our default. We used to hop onto planes and go to go and sit down with officials in different places, or to go and have business meetings everywhere. We used to get into planes and travel abroad, and come back the day after or 2 days after. Suddenly the whole world has changed. If you decide you want to go and have a meeting in New York, you're going to spend 14 days in quarantine. Expose yourself to the risk. Then hold your meeting, and then figure out how to come back. And when you come back to Nigeria, you're also going to quarantine again. So suddenly what used to be like a quick hop, 4 days, sometimes even 2 or 3 days, is suddenly now 4 weeks with associated costs. And so business and government are now asking themselves, there must be another way. We are being propelled and compelled into a space for which the transformation has not occurred. We are going to have to fix this car while the car is moving and is in danger of going over a cliff. We have to fix it while it is moving, because it is moving and accelerating. We cannot stop and start a process of transformation. So what do we need to do? There's a sense of urgency, and I'll use the education space as an example. If we know that we built classrooms for 40 children, if we assume that based on the social distancing which is still in place, that you can no longer put 40 children inside that class, it literally means that we have to double the space that's available for children to go to school, or we have to lengthen the number of hours of school time. So a teacher would not go to class for 8 o'clock and close by 1. They're going to be teaching till 6 p.m. because in the afternoon, the second cohort will come in. And yet, Nigeria had between 10 and 12 million children out of school pre-crisis. What happens to education? The fact that we stopped education, we're compelled to across most of the country, that is the shocker, and that's what everybody should look at. Even parents wanted the children to leave the house. That's what I mean by we have to fix the car as it is moving, because we're never going to be able to stop it and then try to get it right. But it does offer us certain advantages. And the first and the most important is that finally we will come to terms with the realization that learning doesn't happen within 4 walls. In the digital economy, in the 21st century, learning is lifelong, and it comes from a multiplicity of sources. And therefore, we have to go to the borderless classroom, a song that we have been singing for over 20 years. Personally, my first foray into online learning was in the year 1996, decades ago. It has taken us decades to get to the point where what seemed then like a fancy misadventure by some young men has now become the current reality that we must live with. And it's not just a reality, it's an opportunity. Because for the first time, we have a chance to get education to every single person that requires it, just in time, personalized and individualized for each person, and 24/7 on demand. And that shift to virtual learning has to happen yesterday. So we will not have the luxury of that transformation journey that people speak about, because we are suddenly inside it. Literally overnight, a digital economy that may have served 20 million people now has to serve 100 million people. The same infrastructure that was providing each of us occasional bandwidth is the infrastructure that becomes infrastructure for life itself now, for all of us. It must scale rapidly and with resilience to provide this huge growth. So our objective as a country has to be that all the things that have happened before were simply preparation for this moment in time. And that all of us who are in positions to influence what happens over the next 2 to 3 years must double down in terms of the amount of work that we have to do and our commitment to ensuring that we can create value for as many people as is possible. We cannot go into the next few years with the old normal, where people were disenfranchised in terms of the digital economy. We must accept that every one of us is a digitally native citizen today. And this is the way it's going to be for the next, century. And our role and our responsibilities are not diminished, they are enlarged. And we have to live up to it. And my prayer is that we have the vision, the commitment, and the courage to embrace the responsibility.
The educational sector seems to be having it tough in this pandemic era. What solution would you prefer?
I think for some states, Lagos is like a city-state, but it's a completely different ballgame in Borno or in Cross River, where from Calabar to a village where we deployed e-learning took 3 hours, 4 hours, and some places you went by canoe to get to those villages. If 70% of our population lives in the rural areas, that is our key concern. But in a place like Lagos, there's an opportunity. Lagos is probably the size of Liberia. I believe that within the space of 1 year, 2 years, the entirety of Lagos can be covered by a local cloud that will allow online learning to happen at a cost that dramatically alters the model for education in Lagos State. Because of the density, the population, and the GDP, Lagos is a standout. You would find something similar in a place like possibly River State, Kano, possibly, some parts of the southeast where you've got this population density. So deployment of infrastructure in those places can happen quickly and pervasively. The solution is to embrace the requirement for us to go directly into online learning. That's the only way out. We will never build enough classrooms for all the people who need to go to school. We will never have enough teachers for the people who need to go to school. We will never have the availability as at when it is necessary for people to be able to go to school. The only way out is to go online. And if you look at the tertiary environment, the Harvard University people are projecting that by the year 2030, only 10% of American universities will be in existence as presently constituted. The rest of them would have to go online. 2030 is 10 years from now. I sat in a webinar and was listening to this professor saying that there were only 10%, that's 50 to 60 universities in the entirety of the United States would still be in existence as they are in the year 2030, in 10 years' time. That's how fast the movement is. And the reasons were clear. They can no longer sustain the current model for education. And the demands of their economy for skills and competencies far exceeds the capacity of the existing structures to produce the human capital needed. Because an education that costs you $200,000 to get a 4-year degree is no longer the direction in which the world is going. So we have an opportunity to literally shift. Stop building 19th century models and shift to a 21st century model. In that process, there will be some damage. Some people will come to that system slower. But the reality is that there are people who are in school, but not in education today. So we need to literally transit that entire system by taking some radical decisions. And I believe that is the role of technology. This is the primary benefit that technology can deliver to the country today, which is to create the capacity for all 200 million people in this country to go back to school and build skills and competencies that make them productive to themselves, to their communities, and to the country as a whole. This is where we must go, and we must accelerate the process of getting there by taking hard decisions. I believe within 2 years, Lagos will have, with its fiber project, would have capacity for everyone to go to school in Lagos, if we want to. So there's an explosion that is coming in this space, but it's unique. It will not be the same thing for every part of the country, but the direction is going to be the same.
All right, Mr. Chinenye Mba-Uzoukwu, President of the Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria, thank you for finding time to talk to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow, that was our Tech Personality of the Week, Mr. Chinenye Mba-Uzoukwu, President of Institute of Software Practitioners of Nigeria. We hope you found this week's edition quite useful, informative, and educative. Reach us on the numbers and email now showing on your screen. You can also see this on our YouTube channel. On behalf of the production crew, I'm Don Pedro Agambi. I'll see you next time.